All right, last year on this date, on September 21st, the engineering firm Tetra Tech and the Ohio EPA released a report, a feasibility study on the removal of the Gorge Dam. And the EPA held a meeting last September to present the findings to the public. And tonight we do have representatives from the Ohio EPA, the Summit Metro Parks, the City of Akron, and the local kayaking community who have all generously agreed to meet again 1 year later to update on the status of the project. So, and there is some new things to announce tonight, some things that have not been aired to the public. To start off, though, I'd like to do a brief summary of that engineering report that appeared last year. Here's the Gorge Dam. It's an impressive relic of the industrial age. It's a dramatic example of the power of moving water and how to harness it. It's the largest dam built on the Cuyahoga, but the natural beauty of that spot is also impressive. Beneath the dam, the Great Falls of the Cuyahoga is still there. The bottommost fall is visible behind the spillway, but here's the namesake of the city. The dam's original purpose was to create electricity for trolley lines and electric buses run by the Ohio Traction and Light Company from 1913 through 1958. Diesel buses pretty much put that to rest, and the invention of the car, I suppose, the use of the car after the war. The company donated 144 acres of the Gorge property to create the Metro Parks, and that was around 1929, 1930. About 10 years ago, a group called Metro Hydroelectric Company was granted a license by the feds to, again, explore using the dam for hydropower. But that project met with staunch opposition from the Metro Parks and from other groups, probably some of the people in this room. And that led to where we are tonight. That the dam was no longer going to be used for this. The last use of the site was for as cooling water for the Ohio Edison coal-fired plant, and that operated until 1992. It was torn down in 2009. So this is what happens when you free the river. You know, people start using it right outside the Sheraton, thanks to the removals of the two dams in 2013 that Mayor Walters referred to. That project was about $1 million. A free-flowing river not only provides recreation, it enhances water quality and habitat. And this is what the kayakers might see with the dam gone. This is the little river beneath the lake. And this is the Middle Gorge Dam from, I don't know, sometime in the 1800s. And here's an idea of the slope. The kayakers provided this slide. You can see the drop. It's about 160 feet from underneath the lake. And the scale here is, let's see. Here's the lake itself. It has a fishing dock and the occasional boater out there. And here's a profile of that. It's a bit exaggerated, but it gives you an idea of the enormous amount of sediment that has accumulated in the past century. There's 832,000 cubic yards of sediment. 80% of that is clay and silt, 20% sand and gravel. The big lump of bedrock, that's where the bridge crosses the river. And here's an overview of the river and the lake. And you can see that there are spots. Here's the dark spots here is where the sediment is over 30 feet deep. And it's surprising that the sediment is 30 feet deep, this far upriver, way up from the dam. And it gives you an idea of the enormous task it will be to remove all of that sediment. So why? Why should we bother moving it? If we're going to tear down the dam, why not just let all that sediment wash downstream? Well, here's why. Because of some of the industrial activity over a century, there is a lot of waste stored in that sediment. In 2012, the US EPA hired Battelle to oversee a detailed study of the sediment. They found a lot of stuff, most notably PAHs, PCBs, and heavy metals. So I'm going to use a few terms here. PAH is polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. It's tar, basically, the kind of stuff when you smell when they pave a road. The red patches are where the concentrations are above what living things can tolerate. It's called the probable effect concentration, the PEC. And as you can see here, it's around 23 parts per million, or 22 parts per billion, 22,000 parts per billion. And that's the amount you're going to kill off the fish and other critters that are living in the water. There's also a middle ground of contamination. They call that the TEC, the threshold effect. That's where critters are going to get sick. It's called when benthic-dwelling organisms might not survive, but it won't kill them outright. So you can see nearly all of the sediment contains some of the PAHs, except for that little green spot. That's the clean part of it. They also found PCBs, and that's the oil used in transformers. It's famous for working its way up the food chain and killing eagles and other top predators. PCBs, if let go, would eventually end up in Lake Erie in your walleye. But really what we're concerned about are heavy metals. At least I'm concerned about it, having been an analytical chemist who specialized in testing for metals. I'm mostly interested in that. They found a lot of iron and aluminum, but the worst metals of concern are cadmium and lead. Cadmium is extremely toxic. That's why the PEC here, you can see, is 5. Whoops, I went way ahead. Okay. PEC is 5 for cadmium. And then there's lead. So lead is virtually everywhere as well. I did some back of the envelope math here to see how these concentrations add up. Okay, so we have the average amount of lead in that sediment is 189, and that's above the safe limit. That's above the limit that's going to kill all the creatures in the river. Okay, but a comparison of lead paint is 600 parts per million, which is still, it's pretty toxic. We know the ramifications of lead paint, the toxic consequences. So it's not something you want around. But say if you add in all of the lead, it adds up to about 75 tons of lead stored in that sediment. If my math is correct, and I had EnviroScience check it out, that's a lot. Same with cadmium. The amount of cadmium is 17 parts per million on average. That's well above the safe level for that. And the same sort of calculation gives you 6 tons when you add up 832,000 cubic yards of cadmium at that concentration. It's a lot of metal. If this sediment were released into the river, it would cause significant environmental degradation and permanently poison the river for miles downstream. So, what should we do with it? The solution that Tetra Tech came up with last year, one of the preferred solution, they had several options, was to move it down here. And you might recognize this place because of this. So, right next to this is this. It's a field. And it used to be a landfill. 35 acres of woods, mostly cottonwood and black locust, that have grown over what was once a landfill, and it's on property owned by the city of Akron and leased by the Metro Parks. So the sludge will be pumped here under the plan and placed in these long tubes. And this is from another project, but they will fill these sacks, the water drains out, and will be treated on site and then pumped back into the river. And then this whole area will be buried and replanted. So it'll be a mound, 35-acre mound roughly, that will have trees planted on it again, and nobody will know the difference. One thing, when they're pumping the sludge, according to the plan put forth by the engineers, they'll mix it with a polymer. So when they pump it into these sacks, that silt will essentially solidify and hold the contaminants in place. So there will be no more leaching of pollution out of these sacks over time. It's locked in. So it seems like an effective solution. Now it's our panel's turn to talk about, tell me where I was wrong in my presentation. I'd like to introduce Lisa King, Executive Director of Summit Metro Parks, Bill Zawiski, he's Water Quality Supervisor with the Ohio EPA, David Hill is Regional Coordinator with the American Whitewater Association, and Pat Selman is Program Manager with the City of Akron's Engineering Bureau. I would like to begin our panel discussion with a few questions, and each of you can either address these, dance around them, or ignore it. But I'm a warning that they might come back to you. We'll see as the audience joins in. So my one question is, what legal or regulatory obstacles remain? I mean, so we know where we are, what's in the way of getting, and one of those main questions is who owns the dam. That's something that is still in question, and who knows. Basically, though, it's like, how much is it going to cost? And these are the estimates. Are they still good? And who's going to pay for it? Right now, the EPA, the U.S. EPA, has put 65% of that total $70 million for the project, put that forth. But there's still $24.5 million left, and we'll see where that money is going to come from. So let's get the ball rolling. Lisa, how about you start us off?
Well, as you can imagine, Metro Parks has a big stake in this project, as well as the other stakeholders. We support the removal for a number of reasons, and I'll highlight just a few for you tonight. First, and most importantly, we feel it will greatly improve the water quality of the river, which can never be accomplished as long as the dam is in place. It will create a recreational destination by offering a continuous paddling opportunity from Lake Rockwell to Lake Erie for expert paddlers, as well as many other shorter excursions. So we're very excited about that aspect as well. It will restore the natural features of the park, namely the original Cuyahoga Falls, which you saw a picture of, that lies beneath the dam pool. And by unveiling the original falls, we will be restoring an important historic feature of the park as well, part of its history, providing our park staff with new educational program opportunities. So that's very exciting. Removal of the dam is globally significant, we feel. The Cuyahoga River is responsible for the establishment of the Clean Water Act. The removal of the dam is one of the last impediments to achieving true water quality. When it's down, there's real potential for national press coverage, we think, and the dam removal, it's symbolic of the stakeholders' commitment to water quality and commitment to the economic prosperity of the city of Cuyahoga Falls and also the city of Akron, we feel. As a conservation agency at our core, it's right in line with our mission, and we are pleased to support the project. And I'll be here, obviously, answering questions that you might have.
All right, Bill?
I'll try and hit on a few of your questions.
Okay, good.
So first we got to go back in the way back machine and think back in 1972 when the Clean Water Act came out. A great part of that was due to what happened here in Cleveland on the Cuyahoga River, this momentous occasion of an incident and folks getting together and saying, hey, we don't want this anymore. So when the Clean Water Act came out in 1972, the dam was not even something that was thought about because you had many communities with non-existent or poor sewage treatment. We had industrial dischargers. We had all these other issues. It's not that dams were not known to be causing water quality impacts. It's just where we were at that time didn't allow us to even think about that, just getting this under control. And the EPA at that time was more of a do this or we're going to hit you with our regulations. So the mindset of just getting this compliance, that was very difficult. As we progressed forward into what we call the era of watershed management, there's something called a total maximum daily load, or a TMDL. It's a big watershed report, many would say a big boring report that gets written. But what it does is says, here's what's going on, here's where it's not good, here's what we think we need to do to make it better. And when we did ours on the lower Cuyahoga River, the dams are a big problem from a water quality standpoint. We've addressed the sewage treatment. We have very good sewage treatment. We have addressed the industrial dischargers. Now we're left with what are the problems? It's physical thing in the river is bad. It's just always going to be that way because it changes the river into not a river. When we started thinking about this, would we have ever thought that we would get to this point? No. Ohio EPA had to learn to be a little more flexible in how we do things. It helps when you have the ability to provide funding. So these things are newer opportunities because I remember when we met with Mayor Pasquale, it was Mayor Robart at the time, and we said we wanted to take the two dams out. This was maybe 15 years ago. He said, fine, but we're not paying for it. And that was the end of that conversation. And years later, we were able to come back and say, hey, we can pay for it. And so those are the things that we were able to work through. So when we're talking about the legal and regulatory authorities, Ohio EPA is linear in carrying out the Clean Water Act. Protect, maintain the physical, chemical, and biological diversity of our nation's waters. That's my linear thing. You guys can talk about recreation, which we know is going to happen. We know the beautiful, people came here to see. Recreation was a viewing recreation in the early days. We know that's there. We are linear in fixing the water quality. Our authority rests in the Clean Water Act. However, we don't have eminent domain authority. We don't have all these authorities to just go do it. And that's where we try and find out how we can partner, which was at the time new for us to learn how to partner to get these things done. But great things happen when we're able to do that. The cost estimates, part of the reason we were able to get the cost estimates and why we really needed it was we're going to get one shot to go for funding for this. And we need to be as accurate as possible, because if we severely underestimate it, we're in a world of hurt. Because going $30 million under and saying, hey, would you mind loaning us $30 million? That's not going to happen. So it took us a while to get the funding to do the funding, but we were able to do that. So we think those costs are, as long as it's in this kind of near time frame, we think those are going to be pretty accurate, and it is expensive. There is no doubt about that. And how does that get paid for? Well, at the federal level, there are two big programs that are dedicated to Great Lakes, the Great Lakes Legacy Act and the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Hundreds of millions of dollars. So if you think about it in today's world, the President and Congress agreed that the Great Lakes are worth money, and Congress even upped $50 million what the President asked for. So the Great Lakes, in the scope of the nation, are a very important resource. That money is dedicated, $300 million a year can be used for the Great Lakes. We want some of it spent here. So that money is going to go to doing good work in the Great Lakes, regardless of where. So in spite of my friend from Michigan, we want it in Ohio. So the way it works is if your project is selected. So our project is not approved. We are in this process of giving, it's like when people apply for us for money, they want to give us the strongest project they can. And that's exactly what we are doing to US EPA. We've got the cost study, we've got these sediment studies, we're going to have the historic work done. We want to give them a good product and say, hey, this is really worthwhile funding. It is totally up to them whether they choose to partner with us. So if they choose to, then 65% of projects' costs can be paid for through federal funding through these Great Lakes programs. And we locally have to come up with 35%, which when you think $70 million potentially, that's a lot of money. But it can be in kind or cash. The state of Ohio, in its current capital budget, we had $750,000 put forth by the state for this. So that is seed money for doing engineering studies. So the state of Ohio and our legislator has thought this is an important project. So in-kind costs can be using the city of Akron's land. There is a cost that is associated with placing material there per ton. And if you multiply 832,000 by several dollars, you end up with a lot of in-kind costs. So while years ago when we would have started this, like when we started Kent, hi Bob Brown, and how are we gonna pay for this? We were like, it doesn't scare me like it used to. It's still a lot of money, mind you, but I think I have confidence in this area enough and our local partners and the great successes we've seen that is not the worry. My biggest challenge right now is getting the best product we can to US EPA. We've already kind of submitted a preliminary application. They call it an application, so I got that in for you. So we have said, hey, what do you think of this? Because what we don't know is, one, do they really want to take on this project? Because that's totally up to them. But if they do, how would they see us breaking it? Do they want to do sediment removal and structure as separate projects? Do they want to do engineering, structure, so that we're just asking them. So that's what we've done. We've said, hey, this is a thought. What do you guys have the comment on it? So hopefully in the next coming months, we will get a formal application to US EPA. They are coming here to look at this project and a host of others we're asking funding for in the coming weeks. And so we've been building, and it's patience. I was not a very patient person when I started here. But 20 years later, I have reluctantly learned it. So I think that's where we're at. Our goal is, obviously, to restore the Cuyahoga River. And what a great project for all of us and a legacy, and Gary Whidden will be ecstatic. And I think you look at all the folks here that have invested this energy and time into our river, because it is our river. This is cool.
Thank you.
David,
You
you're
knew
up.
this would be easy, didn't you? Just let Bill talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I wanted to get all, I got the questions
You
answered.
did.
don't have to.
I don't have
Almost
to, because I don't have any answers to these questions.
You can ignore it.
No, my name is David Hill, and I'm here representing American Whitewater, which is a nonprofit organization that really works towards providing access, information about rivers, safety, permitting issues, landowner issues, how to get from point A to point B on the river. So that's how I kind of got dragged into this, okay? I grew up in Cuyahoga. I didn't grow up, I've lived here about 25 years, so I've kind of experienced the gorge before I was a paddler. And when I hear people around here talk about how special that area is, it really is. Otherwise, everybody in this room wouldn't be here tonight to find out what's going on. You know, this area used to draw 10,000 people a day over 100 years ago. There is a reason that we're all sitting in this room and the way that we're all drawn down here to the gorge to talk about this issue here today. I just happen to enjoy it a little bit different than some of the people in the room, and, you know, some of those sections up there I have run. You know, some of those sections where they show the historic pictures of what potentially lies underneath that dam pool, if you don't think that has paddlers excited, you're not paying attention. Because the event that we had in April, and I gotta take my hat off to these guys over here, they did a phenomenal job in promoting it. I have to take my hat off to the city of Akron for providing some water, because if we didn't have any water, we wouldn't have an event. I take my hat off to the Sheridan for opening their back doors and letting us play in their backyard. You know, there's a lot of different things that needs to come together to make this as big as everybody's talking about it. Can there be recreation here? Absolutely. 250 feet of elevation change on this river in an urban area, there's not many places like that in the United States. And this is our hometown. You know, so Mayor, you're absolutely right. There is a lot of potential recreation here if we do it right. When you go back to that report and you start talking about the PECs and the TECs and things along that line, the PAHs, the PCBs, and I understand all that because I did environmental work for 15 years. And so this part kind of excites me to see a project of this magnitude happening in my backyard. But I also get concerned because there is a lot of cadmium out there. There is a lot of lead. And so we're going to be the user group that's down there in the water, and potentially those critters that are being exposed to it is going to be this group. So if you don't think that we're concerned about the water quality, that's why they put me next to him.
you up?
No, I guess what I'm saying is, when I see the potential of this area, the recreation that we have here, even with outside the paddling, you have a great park system. You have phenomenal trails. You have mountain biking trails now, which are very nice. All of these add into getting people to stay in this area, to live in this area after they graduate from Akron U. You don't get that brain drain because now all of a sudden you have something to offer them. We now have a national sports team in the Cavaliers. You know, that never happened before. We only had minor league teams up there. There is something special about this area, and it is very important for us to pay attention to everything that is going on in this room, to pay attention to how this sediment is going to get removed, because we're very concerned about it. We're looking forward to working with the parks to open up the paddling possibilities that we have in our backyard, because that's the thing about paddlers. It would almost be like a golfer, and the only course you have is over in Pittsburgh. So you drive to the golf course. That's how paddlers are. We drive to the water. So we'll drive to the Youghiogheny, we'll drive to West Virginia, we'll drive to wherever, and you know what else we do? We take our wallet and we go spend money there, because they have the recreational resource that we don't have here yet. So when you do this right, all of a sudden there becomes a potential for another economic draw into this area that you never realized. You know, one of the visions I have for the park, you transport bikes. How about we transport canoes down in the valley? You put a canoe on that train, and now I don't have to run a shuttle. You know?
You can already do it, $9.
$9 for a canoe? That's perfect. It's perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
First, I'd like to thank these three for answering all the questions so that we can just jump right into the meat of things. But I don't want to get too far away from your statements. I mean, I really think we need to keep perspective of this is a quality of life thing. It's much more, no offense, it's much more than the kayaks. And it's even a little bit more than the fish and the bugs. It's a quality of life. We've got a phenomenal area to live in. We have fantastic parks. We've got a national park at our doorstep. We've got a great, right now, the cost of living is fantastic in this area. And we want to be that attraction for the corporate world that says, I want my corporate headquarters to grow in Akron and Cuyahoga Falls. I want us to have our employees have all these opportunities that they have in this area. And this is just the next step to meet that quality of life that is now expected of areas to provide to their citizens when they want to move into this area, and especially to stay in this area. We need to retain the people in this area to stay here and work here and live here. And also, I want to point out, you mentioned the championship teams. We can't forget the Eastern League champion, AA Akron Rubber Ducks, and their significant accomplishment. Thank you. Unbelievable how you can have the best team for 2 months, the worst team for 2 months, and the best team for 1 month and win it all. So that's enough on that. First, I'd like to take just a little step backwards, if you'll allow me. But there is some questions I know a lot from the city of Akron. We're talking the urban core. Why is Akron involved in this? Again, no offense to, we don't kayak, we don't canoe. What is the benefit? Why should Akron be involved in this? And when you think back, Akron right now, I think most of you are probably aware, Akron is in the middle of a massive sewer project, over $1 billion right now, and there has been significant sacrifice on our ratepayers in order to maintain, pay their sewer bills, pay their water bills, and just to be able to make their checks last for the whole month. And that sacrifice is involved in this sewer project. Right now, there's a major tunnel under construction. There's several storage basins under construction. We've seen significant changes in operation and maintenance of the facility. Is that my 2-minute warning? Is this
No, you're good.
like the Emmys here? I'm getting,
It's a warning of
I'm getting nervous. I've had 30 seconds to finish up.
Take your time.
But there has been a tremendous amount of work, and we've actually already reaped the benefits of that work that's not only going on now, but it's gone on in the past 20 years. And Bill has some phenomenal fish and bug graphs down around the 82 dam, the canal dam, that show the fish and the bugs are like this close. In a lot of cases, they're already in compliance. And a lot of that is because of a lot of hard-earned money spent in Cuyahoga Falls and Akron and the surrounding communities and in the watershed to get us to that point. And Bill made the point, we're amazed that we got to where we are today. You go back in the 70s, nobody would have imagined the river in the condition that it's in now. So now it's time for us to reap the benefits of that. And this dam project is part of that. But getting back to the Akron Sewer Project, that project was in 2009 is when it was submitted to the federal court, and although the consent decree was entered a little later than that, Akron has been implementing that consent decree ever since then of doing these significant projects. In that interim period, US EPA actually came out with what we call an integrated planning process. And part of that process allowed communities that were under consent decrees to go back and look at these massive projects that they have underway, to not only look at the costs, look at the affordability, but also to implement some of these new things that have been around forever, like green technologies, to say, well, maybe we can soften these tunnels and concrete storage tanks and treat the stormwater at its source, keep it from getting in the sewers, and create these green oases throughout the city where you handle the stormwater in a different way. So what Akron did is take a look at this integrated planning process, and we evaluated our entire program, our whole $1 billion program, to see, are there ways that we can save money for our customers? Are there ways that we can provide these additional green benefits? And are there ways that we can provide the other ancillary benefits that come with those? And a lot of that involves doing other city improvements, providing these green outlets in the parks and created wetlands, stormwater best management practices, all those kind of wonderful things. So in the process of doing all that, we looked at doing a triple bottom line analysis on all of our projects. We look at the environmental impacts, the social impacts, and the economic impacts. And basically, we rated all of our CSO projects, all of our projects at the wastewater plant, all of the projects in our sewer system, and also looked outside of that as far as stormwater projects and stream restoration projects, dam projects, anything that could help improve one of those triple bottom line items. When we jammed all this into a magical computer program and spit out the results, heaven forbid, the dam project just popped right up there as, by the way, you could do this dam project and achieve a lot more in regards to water quality and improvement in the river than you can actually do in doing some of your gray concrete CSO type projects. So that's really when Akron, all of a sudden it became, hey, this is the most cost-effective, cost-beneficial project that can be done in this watershed. Shouldn't we put our emphasis towards that? And I see some smiles in the front row. That also leads us to the fact that the Cuyahoga River is still listed as an impaired water. It is going to remain an impaired water until that dam comes down. We could eliminate all of the CSO discharges permanently. That segment of the river will still be in non-compliance because that dam is there. So we will never achieve the beneficial use of that stream until that happens, and the same with the 82 dam. So when you look at the major benefits of this, all of a sudden some of these other projects do start to creep forward. And thanks to a lot of the great efforts by EPA in trying to utilize the National Program Office of the Great Lakes of basically now we've found this big giant pot of money, we'd be silly not to take advantage of that, especially when we can get the local share. At this point, if everything goes according to plan, these in-kind costs won't result in any additional City of Akron resident or sewer customer having to pay more. Because we're using in-kind costs, we're using resources that are already there, and we've got phenomenal partners right now that are involved in this project, and everybody coming to the table, we can make it happen, and it would have a minimal impact on the local area in regards to the costs, and it takes advantage of this big pot of money just sitting up there ready for us to use it. And again, why shouldn't we be the ones using it? Finally, I'd like to mention too, you mentioned the $750,000 that's become available. Thanks to the Greater Akron Chamber, City of Akron actually submitted as part of Senate Bill 310 to get the money through ODNR to provide kind of this catalyst. And with this money, we've got a group together right now between the City of Akron, Metro Parks, and Ohio EPA to start to figure out what are the next steps as far as doing the design of the dam removal, doing the sediment disposal, how's that going to happen, looking at the hydraulics in regards to making sure there are no negative downstream impacts from this, and slope stability, all those kind of good things you need to do to get yourself to a final design. And we want to make sure we get this all in one big package so that we can take advantage of all our local costs right now to all be applying to that local share. So we're excited about this project, especially the fact that right now, you talk about the biggest bang for the buck, especially when it's somebody else's buck. I shouldn't say that it's our money that goes to Washington that comes back, but why shouldn't it come to this area to provide for this dam? So, thank you.
All right, thanks, Pat. These guys deserve a round. I apologize for the lighting situation. It was unforeseen. Yeah. I don't know if anyone wants to respond to anything so far, or should we open it up? All right, let's open it up to anyone in the audience. Go ahead, sir.
If this succeeds, and I think we all hope it does, what class are we going to have of rapids? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6?
All right, David.
That crazy kayaker.
You're probably going to have 3, 4 range down there. I mean, nobody really knows. It's if I could see 1 foot below my feet, I'd have been retired by now. So, and it's really going to depend on how much water is flowing down through there as well. I do want to make one other comment.
Sure.
It's from the paddling community.
There you go.
You're absolutely right, Pat. It's not just about the recreational use down there. It's about all the stakeholders involved in it. And it really comes down to water quality for us as well. Because I mean, look, if you have gradient and you have water and you have accessibility, you have a resource down there that will get utilized. If you don't have water quality, it won't get used. And that's really what the whole driver is behind this project, is to improve the water quality in the Cuyahoga. It's not to create a whitewater section down here for, a small group of the community to use. It's to improve the water quality the way that it has been over the last 20 years through the efforts of EPA and the other public entities in here that have really turned the Cuyahoga around. That's what it's all about.
We do have microphones, so let's, there are two gentlemen here who will take your questions.
Back here.
I grew up loving the waterfall, and I think it's beautiful, the dam. Isn't there a way to adapt that dam to something like Monroe Falls? There's dams in other portions of the river. Why wouldn't it be possible to adapt that dam and keep it?
Good question.
So that's a great question. So Monroe Falls, for example, the original plan was to take that structure halfway down and then have kind of a fishway. Our fish don't jump, so it's going to be like a stream around the side. I remember standing there when it dropped, and the river dropped into the same channel that got buried 200 years ago. The trees that drowned when that dam pool came up were still hugging the same bank. And the mayor, I think at that time, thought the pool would still be there. And he said, it looks like, I'm not going to repeat, you might as well take the whole thing out. And we said, okay. So in that case, we removed the whole structure because it made sense for that section. Kent, you had a historic dam and a historic canal lock. And by opening up that canal lock, you allow the river to pass through. And you go back into the early 70s, Kent State did a whole bunch of corridor studies, and their recommendation was to remove those locks so the river can flow free. And then now you talk about cost. Imagine adapting a 60-foot tall structure that has 1.5 miles of dam pool. The cost of that would be phenomenal compared to the cost of removing it. And then the question is, the U.S. government and Ohio EPA and our partners are not going to want to commit funding to this if it's not going to achieve those water quality benefits. And so, unfortunately, in this section, really because of the grade and the way things are, the removal is the appropriate water quality technique to do here.
All right. Yeah, in Kent, the dam there was built in the 1830s. It's a beautiful structure, but which no longer used for the canal. It was a mill, actually, dam. The dam, the gorge dam, the purpose really is aesthetic at this point. It has no commercial use, so it is a question, I suppose, of cost to achieve those water quality goals and other goals. All right, more questions.
So you're speaking about the city of Cuyahoga Falls and Akron and not really talking about further downstream. I think we all realize that this will have an impact all the way to Lake Erie. Can you address a little bit what's happening, what would happen both negatively and positively for the cities, towns downstream, and would they be asked to participate in the funding because of pros, perhaps?
So I guess those are maybe two questions of jurisdiction, like funding, if it's, who's going to bear the costs, if it's a county-wide or regional or watershed issue, and then also maybe you talk about concerns downstream, is it flooding or things like that?
So as far as who can participate, we will take anyone who wants to contribute funds to this. We are not picky. So if anyone wants to be associated with this project, and that's part of what the Metro Parks and the stakeholders group is really doing, is who in the community, and they're looking wide, really wants to be a part of this project, because it's a really cool project. So there are no boundaries for that. As far as the impacts downstream, obviously the sediment thing that David and you kind of hit on, we cannot let that sediment go downstream. Even if it was pure and there were no chemical contaminants, if you're little fish and bugs and you're getting 2 feet of muck dumped on your head, you're unhappy. So physically, we can't let that go downstream. And then when we're looking at what can we do, it's going to make the river better. Flooding-wise, the structure doesn't offer any flood protection. I mean, it's what we call a run-of-the-river dam. Water goes in, it's already full of water, so you can't store any water in the full of water. And water comes in, water goes out. So from a flood standpoint, it offers zero control. And that's one of the things that Pat talked about, is we always do these hydraulic studies just to confirm that. We've done enough of these that we know but you want to make sure, especially around roads and bridges, and it's not, the water height is going to change by 0.1 millimeter or something. When you look at it, it's just a calculation. It's the velocity, the speed that can change, and so our concern is really about, are we going to have an erosive force that's generated that might put a structure at risk? So that's why we do all these things because we don't want to do that. So we're going to look at all this up front so that we kind of eliminate all these potential issues at the beginning of a project.
I'd like to just pause a moment, and we were referring a couple times to a new panel, a new group of stakeholders. Lisa, I'd like you to let everyone in on the next phase that Pat and Bill and a group of 8 people are part of a new panel that's working in the next phase. So if you would detail that right now.
Sure. We've pulled together what is basically the initial stakeholder group. So that would be, of course, Metro Parks, the EPA, City of Akron, City of Cuyahoga Falls, Summit County Council, and Summit County Executive's Office. Senator LaRose actually joined us as well. And, okay, so that's, I'm sorry, First Energy, of course.
And First Energy.
So we have had our first meeting only to just kind of get to know one another, talk about the project, kind of talk about what the next steps are. So really just kind of getting our feet under us and going forward. So that's what that group initially consists of. But as you said, going forward, as we grow a little bit and understand the pieces that are coming next, others could certainly fold into that group.
What is the purpose of that panel?
Well, I think that, we want to show coordination as we go through this process, getting the application through the federal EPA, and then also that looks good on an application as well to the local. So we want to show how we are all contributing. So that partnership and that collaboration that happens, that was the purpose. That's the purpose.
Okay, so that's not actually funding the hydrology study that we were talking about?
That's
Okay,
correct.
That's a separate group, okay.
Yes.
All right, back to the questions. Oh, Pat has a comment
Just
here?
add that briefly. I know some people are getting antsy already about the $750,000 that was awarded through ODNR. At this point, we do want to, I don't want to say hold up long, but we do need to pause a moment until we really figure out the Great Lakes Program Office in regards to their participation, because we need their project agreement to define what the local costs are going to be, because right now, state money is considered to be local. So we don't want to start spending that money right now and not have it credited towards our local share. So we really need to make sure we've got all our ducks in a row. Back to the rubber ducks, we got to get
Yep.
as many of those as we can. Get all our ducks in a row before we proceed ahead to make sure we fully take credit for all of the local monies that are spent on the project.
All right,
Thank you.
good point.
Just a question here. Two-part question. So when you removed the dams, the upper dams, what happened to all that sediment? And was that an issue, maybe not to the degree that this one is? And the second part of the question is, so the sediment behind this one, obviously there was companies that were involved with the contamination. Are they still around? Do they have some ownership in that or what?
So the first part, yes, there was a crazy plan to doing all this. We wanted to start upstream, so ultimately all the sediment we removed, because we knew from the very beginning the sediment in the gorge would have to be physically removed. That there was just enough there that we couldn't let it go downstream. So we knew that. We staged all the upper ones. I think part of it was luck in the order they fell in, and part of it was our master plan. It just happened to be lucky and worked out.
Okay.
But the sediment has migrated down, and we've been working with a professor at the University of Akron in the Cuyahoga Falls. You had one that was very steep, so that sediment was probably gone in a week because of the energy of the river. When you look at the stuff that was in the Waterworks Park that had been built up, it's all moved down, and if you canoed it, there was a wall, and every time we'd paddle, you'd see this wall of sediment creeping down. So it's in the gorge now. So that was kind of a plan. And then as far as, what was the second one?
And what was the second part? Oh, liability. The
liability
liability,
of-
basically, yeah. I mean, there was 100 years of
So,
industrial
yeah.
activity, including
So
the power plant.
So when we looked at the sediment and we did that big study that the U.S. EPA funded $1 million of sediment analysis, and that's how we know all this stuff. The good news is it's not hazardous waste. The good news is it's kind of icky, and that allows us to seek this federal funding. So if it was just purely sand and silt, we would not have this ability to seek federal partnerships to help us remove it. So when you're talking, is it a hazardous waste, or when you think of the big picture at the federal level, something called the Superfund program, there you have to go back and seek potentially responsible parties to help share that cost. That's not what we're doing here. So that's, I mean, yes, every one of you that lives upstream of the dam that washes your car in your driveway has contributed something here. So, it's a watershed-wide issue. Is there specific companies? No. Have they done that? They spent $130 million in the Niagara River, and they knew who the party was, and yes, there was a definite cost share there, but that's not the way this is working out.
Good question.
If I understood the discussion correctly, was it mention of Aquion charging to dispose of the waste at Cascade, and why would that be?
Well, what we're looking at right now is just using the property for the disposal could be an in-kind cost. So we basically get a credit towards the local share for that in-kind cost. The leachate that comes out of this, there's still, I'd say, a little bit more to be done to decide whether it needs to be treated on site or whether it actually could be discharged to the City of Akron sewer at that point and be treated at the water reclamation facility for the City of Akron. That also could be in-kind costs. And kind of a third option, depending on what the samples show of what actually comes out of the leachate, it could actually be a direct discharge right to the river at that point, with just some minor treatment to be done in regard to pH adjustment or something like that. So there's really kind of some 3 or 4 options right now that could be done, and really all the results of those all could be part of that local share or that local cost.
Did we answer your question about why Cascade Valley? Yes. Okay.
Over here.
I wanted to piggyback off that question about the treatment. How long would those treatment tubes be in place that you showed at the Chuckery area?
So that's it? There's no part 1, part 2? Because I'm not gonna...
Just a question. Yeah.
So they've done this before. If anyone has ever been to Sippo Lake down in Stark, they dredged Sippo Lake, and this is exactly how they did it. They put this stuff in these big tubes, and the sediment dewaters there, and then they're permanently entombed in place. So this, once they're there, that will be their new home. That's their new forever home. And so it's already on a landfill. So when we were looking at land, we don't want to go making new land to be a mini landfill, basically, is what we're doing. So we have the ability to do that. From the very beginning, it was stay the heck away from the signal tree.
Yeah,
So-
stay with it. Don't touch it.
And when we were out with Tetra Tech, the contractor was like, stay away from here.
And the floodplain.
Yeah, and the floodplain, so that was all part of this, and this just happens to be, again, physical luck, that there's a site, it's potentially available, and it'll suit the needs.
And there's still 3 alternatives in there, of
There-
which one is that site, and then there's possibility of hauling it somewhere else. I think you had 2 haul sites that were potential. But at this point, that's the most cost-effective site.
Fiscally, it's the
Yeah.
attractive
I
one.
think in that report, one of the other alternative was trucking it using mechanical dredging rather than hydraulic dredging. So actually lifting up and putting it on a truck. And I think they said it was something like 90,000 truckloads, something like that, to haul that stuff away. And you still have to dispose of it somewhere. So the option that Tetra Tech put forth of pumping it, they'll have to build a pipe from the gorge downriver, it's 1.5 miles or so, to the Chuckery area for that dewatering.
And if you fish it at any of the state lakes, like Finley or any of the state lakes, that's how they do it. When they dredge the lakes, they do this hydraulic pump and dredge. So it's not new in Ohio.
What kind of an impact is this going to have on the recreational use for the Chuckery area?
Well,
Can I hear that one?
yeah, there we go, Lisa,
This is a
yeah.
park thing, this is yours.
Can I hear it again, please?
What kind of an impact is this going to have on the recreational use for the Chuckery area?
The area that we're looking at has one trail crossing. So when we lay out the tubes, basically, when they're dewatered, it will be covered with soil again and revegetated. Where the trail crosses, we will have to look at, how we do that. to kind of get through or around that area. So one trail crossing is not such a huge impact that we don't think we can get over. So the area that we're looking at, it currently has nothing else other than some new growth forest on it.
I have a
Smaller
question,
trees.
is that, you think it would take the whole 35 acres?
I think that we're not going to know until we get into it.
Any
A lot of
idea?
sediment.
I mean,
Yeah.
we know what we think we have. We'll know better once we get started.
Okay, well, the way the report is right now, that they assume that it would take the whole area of the woods that's there.
That's fair.
One of the answers about trails is that when that Chuckery opens up, we'll have a trail of the old Chuckery Raceway, which is 2.5 miles of stone walk that goes along the south side that is was open many years ago. But when we are able to get there now, we'll be able to use that very quickly and have a tremendous new walking area that 10,000 or 130 years ago, we had all those people were walking from the Glens Park down across the down to the falls, and then there's even a bridge that exists there that they crossed over and then went back up towards Cuyahoga Falls, and that's the kind of opening we're going to have. And also, when it is open, that a lot of people were playing in the water in the gorge area, 100 years ago, and they didn't kayak at all. So
That's
we
true.
agree. And I like to add another thing about it, the economic impact of that we'll have clean water all the way from up in at the beginning of the Cuyahoga River all the way down to Cleveland. And there are very few places that you can have clean water, all ranges of water in this kind of a location. It's going to be a tremendous boost for Northeast Ohio. There's just no question about that.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Any questions? There you go.
Do you have a timeline in mind, or do you have a conservative time of when the project would start and how long it would take?
So obviously with US EPA being the major partner, their timeline, if they choose, remember, nothing is approved, so this is if they choose to support this project, because we've done our work, it's their timeline. They fund out years in advance. So like this is a big project, so what they would like to do, and they're just finishing up a couple now that are $100 million, they stagger them so they can do multiple projects. And so I'm guessing if they choose to support us and it goes forward, years in advance they're planning these things out, and it would be staggered with other projects. So nothing in the immediate future, but hopefully before my retirement date, and Gary says I have to do it before he passes away. So I have, he'll still be happy if it comes out one way or another. So yeah, and in timing of doing it, dredging, part of it depends on the river. So if you paid attention to the Cuyahoga Falls project, it was supposed to start in a certain time, and then Mother Nature decided, yeah, I'm going to hold you off for a bit. That went out, once it started, it went really quick. Obviously, we're looking at months to dredge this volume of material. So whether that is a 2-year seasonal thing because of just timing, and then the structure, so that'll take, better part of a year, which way that year slides. And then the removal of the structure is definitely, because it's so big and thick and solid concrete, is going to be weeks. There's no way around that. And pardon me?
It's awful weak. It's like one sack concrete filled in all those rooms.
That takes time, because you have to also, remember, part of the whole process is we're doing this in a controlled fashion to not hurt that which we are trying to make better.
Yeah.
So blowing it up would be quick and fast, but they do that out west, but it's not going to be the official.
Dramatic.
It's
Yeah.
not how we are going to do it here. So a controlled demolition is going to take time. If the river flows come up where the crew thinks it's not safe, then it won't happen until that time it's safe again. So you're looking at a 2-year project, whatever time frame that would happen, provided, of course, that we're fortunate to get the funding.
Would you
there will always be, I mean, there will be water going over. My guess, if any of you are YouTubers, the folks that they've done some 90-foot dams out west. One of those knuckleheads had a GoPro, and he's sitting on his jackhammer, and he backs it up, and then the whole barge goes up, and then when it goes down, he's looking straight down 90 feet. And they just sit there and they chip it away, and they make teeth, and they eat their way down the dam. And so water is always flowing, so they're not stopping the flow of water, but it's going to be a controlled. No, that's got to go first.
Yeah, the
So
silt will
the
go
whole thing is still, we're doing that to be environmentally sensitive. Right.
I think the important part right now in regards to Schedule 2 is to get in line. Because right now, we know there are a lot of national priorities. The Great Lakes is still a high priority. The area concerns are an extremely high priority. And they are trying to delist as many of these as they can right now. So the sooner we get in line, because you never know, 2 or 3 years from now, they may say, oh, we don't care about the Great Lakes anymore. Let's do the Gulf of Mexico. So this is a huge step right now to get the application in and get in order so that we do know in that long line when the funding will be available.
The report, the Tetra Tech report, is available online too. If you search for it, it has all the details about that part of the removal, the chipping, and all the different aspects of dam removal are included in that report. I want to throw in a question though that didn't get addressed: is who owns the dam? When you talk about the time frame, I mean, if this becomes a legal battle, if it ends up in court, that could really slow things down. Will either of you, any of you, address that question?
City of Akron does not own the dam.
Okay.
Cuyahoga Falls, you agree, Mayor? Cuyahoga Falls does not own the dam.
Ohio EPA does not own the dam.
There we go.
All right, so that's, and I assume David doesn't.
No, the paddlers, we don't own it either.
Okay, the paddlers.
It would have been gone a long time ago.
So, Lisa.
Yeah. The reason I didn't speak to it is because at this point, the stakeholders have all walked to the table willingly.
Yeah.
We're all sitting down and we're talking about the aspects of this project, and ownership has not come up. So at this moment in time, ownership is not a critical issue. We do realize that stakeholders will have to discuss that in earnest. At some point, we will have to probably write an ownership on the line somewhere. So at some point, it will be resolved. All stakeholders are bound and determined to not be a holdup at all in this project. So I don't want to minimize your question, but at this moment, I don't have an answer for you, and we're not even talking about it.
That's great. Okay, so when that time comes, that we'll find out. Okay,
Yeah.
Great. All right, let's move on with questions. Boy, a lot of questions. We'll let the guys with the microphones decide.
Well, thank you. Looking forward to it. My question is there any other example of a dam that's been removed that has had these kind of sediments? And are there other areas that are looking into this as an example, other cities where dams would be removed?
Yeah, you mentioned that the national eyes, when this happens, that people around the country might be looking at it.
So there have been other dams and other sediment projects that are way more costly than this. So in the scope of these big Great Lakes funding projects, while this is significant, it is nowhere near the biggest one they've done. Dam removals, there have been out on the West Coast 95 feet they've done on a couple of the Elwha River they've been working on, and there's some really big old hydro dams out there. So again, this won't even be the biggest one. And when you're talking about do other people pay attention, when Kent and Monroe Falls came down, they both got national attention because it was early in the process and we're using these watershed things that we do to say, hey, let's work at this. And then there was a historical layer that went over the top, which made those projects unique. And so, yeah, they did get national attention. And the state of the Cuyahoga River being what it is, I mean, it's part of the reason we have modern environmental laws and modern environmental regulations. So we are in that spot. We can be sad maybe because we had that little fire in '69, or be really proud of how far we have come. And at our office, folks come from all over the globe to see the Cuyahoga River because it is that important internationally as this restoration symbol. And so I'll tote another thing. David's working for he has the American Whitewater people. There's a big organization called American Rivers, and they do this big annual river rally. And we went to one in Pittsburgh, it's Pittsburgh, but it was okay. And we started talking to their executive director, and Mandy started I would say it's controlled stalking. And we are able, and we have agreement that the 2019 River Rally will be in Cleveland. And even cooler, they usually have it in the May-June cusp. They moved it to the weekend that the river caught fire. So the 50th anniversary, we'll have that here. So that's cool. Another plug for the Cuyahoga.
All right. I knew there would be news
Shameless.
happening tonight. That's a great announcement. I'd like to bring up something that David did mention about water flow, and this might include you, Pat. But when you're down, you have to coordinate these events. They're trying to plan the river race. They had it in April when there's a lot of water. But if we do see recreation happening more often, we get improved water quality. How can we ensure flows that are going to make sure that this resource is usable? That it's, that if they plan a kayaking event in August or something like that, are those discussions possible? Are they going to happen? What do you think about working with water flow from the city of Akron?
Actually, we've already had some of those discussions with Ohio EPA just in regards to voluntary releases because of the water quality aspect of just maintaining a minimal amount of flow. But on the flip side, the city of Akron provides water to plus 300,000 people. Obviously, the water supply will always be the number one priority in any case. But when it rains, the water is coming. There's no way it's going to be held back. So I really think we're going to have a significant administrative public notification. There's going to be a lot of work that's going to have to be done, not only with the water system, but also with the overflows. Because we still will have bacteria issues, we'll still have overflow issues that need to be addressed, and we'll have to manage them. I mean, just like anything else. We'll have to manage the water system to the best we can to try to optimize these events. It was kind of funny, the event in the spring that they had in the falls, I've never seen so many people go into their smartphones checking the flow rates at the Portage gauge. And it's like, oh, it's 5, oh, it's up to 7, now it's down to 6. And whenever the gun did go off, for some reason it was, I guess, perfect. But there is a lot that's going to have to be done in regards to management plans to manage what we do have, to make sure that we can try to at least hit those minimum maximums when we need to. But again, we do have to guarantee the water supply. That's number one priority.
Right, from Lake Rockwell.
Yes, absolutely.
As you work through the application, what are you seeing as the biggest risks of the project right now that the US EPA might come back and view the project adversely and possibly not fund it relative to some of the other projects that might be requesting funding?
Well, in no way am I going to speak for US EPA. I'm going to speak out of my rose-colored glasses. I think we are giving them one heck of a project. We've spent, and we here, a tremendous amount of time investing energy and monies to get this really good, solid application. So all we can do is the best that we can do and give them this really good product and hope that they think it is worthy of funding. And so, what the chances are, that is totally up to them. Do I feel comfortable that we are doing a really good job and kicking out when we finally get an application to them? Is it going to be a good one? Yes.
And we do have an Ohio guy in the program office.
Oh, yeah, that former director of ours.
We do have a former director that's up there, so
Sort of.
everything has been very positive up to this point, very positive.
And they recognize, don't think that they don't recognize also the importance of this river overall. So anyone that plays in our little water field knows just how important the Cuyahoga River is. So these little improvements and now great improvements that we've been doing, everyone knows.
Bill, could you speak for a second about the benefits to the fishery, and maybe more specifically, are we going to see steelhead making it past the original falls, and what's it going to look like when it's done?
All right, fly fishing.
Well, Mr. Holofsky. So, not even seeing. So steelhead for the fishermen is an invasive fish in the state of Ohio. So my DNR brethren are going to hate on me. But it is an economic thing that if you're a fisherman, you just don't have one fishing rod. You don't have 10 fishing rods because you need 3 or 4 crappie jigs. You need a bunch of that stuff. So I think anytime you can improve the fishery, that's a good thing. It will change. Anytime you take a dam out, historically fish hit this wall, they go dam, and then they don't move past it. So our native fish do not jump it. We do know that the steelhead jump the canal diversion dam, so it's maybe 8 feet high. They jump right over that, and they spawn in Yellow Creek and Furnace Run, so we know that that's already going on. We know historically that the sturgeon, the Great Lakes sturgeon, used to spawn at the base of the Great Falls. So we know fish, when you go back into these old reports, you have fish like northern pike. This was a great northern pike fishery. Smallmouth bass is the clean water fish. The largemouth bass is the more fish that likes the ponds, but they're both in the Cuyahoga. You have walleye would run up, and folks that have done it, there are actually river spawning walleye, and then there are lake spawning walleye. So we know all these fish, which are the important game fish. So that's for the fishermen. From Billy's standpoint, you get darters and little minnows, and all those are telling us a story about water quality. And so for the ecology part of it, those fish are equally and maybe even more exciting when you start finding cool things like rainbow darters. We know when you mentioned the water quality, below the canal or the 82 dam, we have actually hit fish community numbers, so we assess it and give it a grade point average, that are rivaling the Chagrin and Grand Rivers. That is pretty cool. So when you think about that, just in the last 15 years, we've seen these tremendous increases in fish. The bugs have actually been really good for about 15 years, and we've seen these tremendous improvements in fish communities in the big river. We're seeing marginal improvements in smaller streams because every time we develop, you alter that habitat and you change stuff, and a big development in a small stream has a monster impact. So we're seeing improvements and then some other challenges in some of these other streams, but things are getting way better than they used to be.
I have a question about the final design study. You mentioned that looking at the hydraulics and the slope stability and some of the details of what the impact of the dam removal. Does that study have to be completed before you make your application to the US EPA? Okay, so then where does the funding come for that? How much do you estimate that will cost, and how long will that take?
So we have, it's basically, what we're talking about is a hydraulic analysis of the river. So it's a bunch of measurements, and then little engineers put a bunch of math in a computer, and they push go. And then it tells you heights, velocities, energy of a stream, and that's really important. Depending on verification, so that part is easy. Then going back and tweaking the model to make it truly represent the river, that's called validation. That's a tough part. We're guessing that's $100,000, $200,000-ish. So it's in the big world, it's not pricey. But if someone came to me and said, "Hey, you're going to cough up $200,000."
Well, is that really the only study that you need now to complete?
So that's an important study. The historic review needs to be done. So that's part of ultimately the big federal sign-off. They have to ensure compliance with the whole host of laws.
Okay.
And so the understanding the historic significance of
Is
the
the Metro
structure.
Parks in charge of that study?
Yes.
Okay, the
Yeah,
historic review.
We have folks on staff that will handle that. That will be a small part of our in-kind.
And is that looking at like buried roller coasters in the
Roller
lake
coasters,
and
I don't
things
know
like
about
that?
buried, but yes, they will do a full cultural study, historic study on that, and, going back to the 1800s.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then the last thing we're doing is we're going to ask for like a geologic stability study. The whole thing is on bedrock, so we're pretty comfortable that it's going to still be there.
Sure.
But if your house is near the edge of the bedrock, I think you'd be a little more comfortable knowing that someone looked at this and then they said, "Hey, nothing's going to happen." When you look at a lot of the houses are already back from the water and they're on these bedrock cliffs, so looking forward, it's not going to be a big deal from a reality standpoint because the bedrock will still be the bedrock.
So like if the water goes away and it changes the hydrology and draws stuff out.
It's just a due diligence thing
Creates
that
instability, but
we all
yeah.
feel is important because of the nature of the structure of the valley here, and we want to have that study.
Okay. Just thought all right, we have
There you
more
go.
questions?
Sort of, kind of, maybe. So you
Yeah,
had that one
I was thinking, yeah, if I
profile.
could go back to that
So
one.
if you think about this section of Cuyahoga River, it is actually a greater drop in height than Niagara Falls. It's just stretched out. But when we were looking at the sediment depth to try and get that volume, they're poking these big tubes down until they hit bedrock. So that's what we think is still there. If you walk all the way, you go to where the boardwalk goes down and you look a little downstream, you can see some of those remnants of the toes of these falls. Hopefully, what we don't know is when they built it, did they just drill some holes in there, put little rods and then pour around it, or did they chip it out? There's a whole host of things you don't know, but regardless, there's a 25-foot drop in height. That's about how tall the whole thing was right there. So in one way or another, it still exists there. But until you open that box of chocolates.
Yeah, it might not look like this when they're done with it. Some more questions?
This poor guy has had his hand.
Oh, okay.
At the beginning.
Give him
What's your question?
Let's give him a microphone.
I just was curious as to the Department of Natural Resources and how they're playing into this, and more specifically funding. Is there opportunity for funding from the DNR? And also, have we looked at the Pittman-Robertson Act to try to get some funding out of there as well?
So right now, no, we haven't looked at other ways of funding. We have kind of this potential playbook, and if it works, it covers things that we need. Are there other opportunities for once let's say we're successful and this comes out, are we going to look for other ways to enhance recreation, to enhance trails? I mean, Cuyahoga Falls is doing that right now, and they've built some of these canoe ramps going down in there. So that happens, but it's not a direct thing in a project. Remember, this project is driven by US EPA and Ohio EPA. It is a water quality project. The ancillary benefits that we get while we recognize are not why we're doing this. This is to improve water quality and manage the sediment. Once everything is done, will we assist folks if we need to do restoration in an area? Yes, we have funding that we can do that. If they're going to go for parks or different kinds of funding to do that, it opens up at that point. The Department of Natural Resource is always a partner because they're a state agency. They're always brought in because of their knowledge of the fishery and how they see things. So we don't want to do things that go against where they're at, but they are still about improved water quality, improved fishery, and in their case, improved experience for the users, which is fishing. Oh.
Is there a concern transporting the cadmium and the lead to a new location?
No.
Well,
Sorry.
I think I might have, I don't know, I was being a bit dramatic, I suppose, of the toxicity of that. I mean, it's certainly, there's many tons of heavy metals that are buried there. But as Bill said, it's not a Superfund site. This is not listed as hazardous waste, so it makes it much cheaper to dispose of. They don't have to have liners, I believe, and a lot of the other sort of protection for that. And I'm very, I mean, I'm no expert, but it's consoling to me to know that they'll mix it with a polymer so that it's, once the silt is in that bag, there won't be anything leaching out of it in the future. That technology, if I'm correct about how that works. And then once they bury it, I suppose they could monitor the leachate, the runoff, but I assume the city of Akron might be in charge of monitoring the dewatering those tubes are draining. Is that right, Pat? That would be under your
We really need to figure out what the treatment technology is going to be, because if it is treated on-site, that really could be anybody. If it's coming to the water reclamation facility, we'd have to figure out how it could be controlled. Obviously, we can't take that kind of leachate during wet weather conditions, so there's some controls that we put on it at that point. And if it's discharged directly, I mean, we'd have some permit requirements that would have to abide by, and they'd sort of have a certain amount of monitoring and sampling. But yeah, that's far enough down the road yet. We're not exactly sure how it's going to fall out.
My point really is, I guess if I can, my opinion, that the river right now is being used to store 832,000 cubic yards of sediment that's contaminated with a century's worth of industrial waste. And is that really the best use of that river? I don't know. I mean, if you could put it somewhere and bury it and let it go and plant grass on top of it and stuff, maybe that's a better solution. Then you could use the river for what it was intended. But and I'm objective. I'm supposed to be objective. This guy's been waiting to ask a question for a long time.
My question's for Lisa. I've read that Mary Campbell's Cave was buried by the dam, and that the cave that we're calling it now is not Mary Campbell's Cave. Is there anything to that?
That's
Tell them
actually.
to read the report.
Okay, I'm supposed to tell you to read the report. I personally I hadn't heard that before.
It's talked about in here.
There are some trails and things that we had some pictures. If you look at the Cuyahoga Falls Historical Society, they have some pictures of what the Middle Gorge did look like, and there were some trails there and some caves. There are a lot of caves, in fact. But I think the one that is marked Mary Campbell's Cave is, in fact, the one where she was, she hung out at that time. No, there's a point of dissension there. That's good. We want that. Okay.
I will do that, thank you.
Really? Oh, well, that's good. Yes?
I've never been an advocate of burying your waste like the river, and now we're pumping it underground, and this is going to be a big site where material is going to be stored. I'm always leery of that kind of thing, that it's going to come back and bite us in the future. Since batteries have failed in that area, but I understand there's some solar panels that are in the making now that are using that technology. Is it a resource that can be mined at some point rather than just left buried?
Well, I imagine it would be much more expensive to extract the cadmium from that silt than it would be worth to buy it on the market, on the open market as a pure cadmium. Mostly, yeah, today cadmium is used for batteries, but it's also as part of some of the smelting and other, there was rubber factories and steel and obviously all the coal. A lot of heavy metals are part of coal dust, and that I think that in terms of the origin of some of those contaminants in the sediment, that if you look at pictures of what the gorge looked like 150 years ago, there were smokestacks continuous, just like a wild west of industrial activity in Cuyahoga Falls. And all of that stuff went into the river, and since 1913, all of it's been trapped in that sediment. Again, when it's sitting in the river, it gets in the ecosystem. I mean, fish and wildlife end up contaminated with it, especially the organic compounds. I know, it's sad that that's the legacy of our industrial past, but I think maybe a safe disposal somewhere, and if it's trapped in a polymer and it's buried underground, I don't think it's going anywhere. So, I don't know. That's a good question of making use of.
Yeah. There's another dam removal that's going on right now on the Sandusky River. That's the Ballville Dam, and it's run into problems, lawsuits and so on, halting the work and so on. What do you think the risk of that happening on this project is? Is that one of your projects, for one thing? Is that Ohio EPA?
Not my district.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Do you think the engineering study that you've done is more thorough than the work they did there?
So the big difference from this project, the way we want it to go, versus Ballville, we are taking the sediment out. In the Ballville Dam, they had done some studies saying they want that river to reclaim the sediment. So when you think about it, All the stuff that's built up behind the dam should have already been in Lake Erie minus the industrial contaminants. But you said, the bulk of it is sand, silts, and clay. That's part of what's called bed load in a stream, and a river moves stuff. And anytime if you went to Monroe Falls, and after the dam was out, that river is narrowing, because as soon as sediments started dropping out, the river goes over the falls, the dam, and starts reclaiming sediment. That's erosion. So we disrupted that stream's ability to do its job, which is move sediment down. The Ballville Dam, they're trying to let that happen again naturally, and I think that's where there's differences of opinion. Is that the appropriate thing to do? For us, we acknowledge from the very beginning that releasing this, independent of any contamination, releasing this volume of sediment downstream is not the appropriate thing to do. It needs to be managed.
Yeah, Bill, I was just going to ask, can fish and bugs, do they move upstream of that, what's up on the picture there? I mean, if that were to be the case, can they get past that?
So bugs, absolutely. The things that we look at as macroinvertebrates are actually baby bugs. So the juvenile stage is like the dominant life form in a lot of these insects. So that's not a big deal. For fish, I'm going to guess in some ways it is going to be a natural migration barrier, and we have those. You'll have, now the pool, what's going to happen in the former pool, if you remember the ups and downs, there are potentially 30-foot deep pools in this gorge that will support all kinds of cool things. So if you watch that crazy fisherman, Jeremy Wade, those pools at these big energy, when you have these big falls, you have energy in the river and you get these pools. You will see things in there. So this was historically probably a stopping point for many fish, just because our fish don't jump. But that doesn't mean that above it wasn't also populated with things moving down. So it's a connection. And what's going to happen? I mean, we know, and we've done the work, that the ecology of these streams does recover after a structure. We know the structure causes ecological and habitat harm. That's very clear in the literature and in the state of Ohio stuff. And the recovery does happen.
This hydraulic dredging seems to be a major amount of dredging up there with a very uneven bottom structure. Has projects like this been done other places successfully to this extent?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you think about the dredging, depending on which one they do, because there are a couple of options in there, the Bering Sea, those crazy gold diggers that are sucking stuff up, that's one option. There's another one where at the end of this is something that looks like a snow blower, and they drop it to the bottom. So it's your per unit area that you're moving is actually, when you compare it to the size of the river, very tiny. So bumps like this up and down, no big deal.
I like you mentioned river monsters, Jeremy Wade.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I wasn't sold before, if he was going to come here and film an episode.
He was here on the Rocky River.
Wow.
Because in the old days there was this really cool boneheaded fish called Dunkleosteus that was like a tank. Yeah. And our Devonian Shale is known for that stuff. So Jeremy Wade came and went out with Cleveland Metro Parks on that, like by the Interpretive Center, looking for dunk.
All right, just a sidebar there.
There you go. Yeah, well, you started it.
I know.
Switching dam subjects, could anybody give us an update on what the status of the Route 82 dam removal is?
I would be glad to. So we just had a public open house on the completed draft environmental assessment. So after the patience thing, 20 years, we have finally got to the point where we have a public comment period that ends at the end of September here. And what'll happen is we'll review it, address public comments just like we would any other document. And at the federal level, then it goes to their regional office to ultimately be approved. Or comments, and you address it, whatever. But we're looking at that in early 2017 for the approval of the environmental assessment. And then at that point, it means basically that our work of, just like we're doing here, this due diligence is done. Now the project's ready to go forward. We already have funding to do the work. Realistically, 2018 is probably the appropriate year. The removal of the structures has to coincide, that'll be on the contractor, with also construction of the way of maintaining water in a canal, because of its historic significance, that's always been a part of this process. So we're looking at ideally 2018.
Bill.
Oh, yes.
I'd like to address this to you. With the dams that came down in Monroe Falls and Kent, you talk about the wall of sediment that came through and through past Waterworks Park. And now you're talking about 30-foot deep pools that are very important for fish and other things in the river. But a lot of that sediment that came down from Kent and Monroe Falls filled a glacial pool 50 feet deep at Hudson Drive and the river. And is that ever going to be cleaned out? I mean, is the cleanup of the river, upriver of the Gorge Dam now, is that cleanup completed? And are you satisfied with that glacial pool being filled?
Well, that glacial pools are designed to be filled and eroded. A stream, that's a natural process of streams. It probably was accelerated in erosion when the dam itself was constructed and you had additional erosion going on. So do we go back and say, hey, there needs to be a pool here, there needs not to be a pool here? Not necessarily. So are we satisfied with the recovery that we've seen in both Kent and Monroe Falls? Yes. Kent fish community recovered within 6 months because you had that grade, you had everything perfect. Monroe Falls has taken a little longer. The bugs in Monroe Falls actually recovered in 5 years, and they went past our expectation to go to that exceptional number that we see in the Chagrin and the Grand. So from an ecological standpoint, we're seeing that recovery occur.
As you're aware, the grade there by Waterworks Park is fairly
Oh, yeah, and that's
flat.
why that sediment got hung up there.
Erosion of the gravel and pushing that on downriver at that area is almost non-existent. That glacial pool will not erode back out again.
Probably.
And it was created by a glacier and not natural erosion.
I would check that out. Is that by Waterworks Park, the pool you're talking about? Okay.
By Hudson Drive, close to the Acme, the park that's...
What, was it
Hudson
50
and
feet
Front.
deep? Was it 50 feet?
10, 15 years ago, it was probably close to 18, 20 feet.
Okay.
I've dove scuba there since then, and it didn't dawn on me that that's actually filled up with sand, because it's only about maybe 12 feet deep now. Sand is full.
Are there any other species of concern other than fish that might benefit from the dam removal? Like mussels, that kind of thing?
So the freshwater native mussels are one of what we would call a sentinel species. They're super sensitive to pollution. Unfortunately, because of the legacy of the Cuyahoga River, many of them have been extirpated from it, and their recovery, where fish and bugs can be in the level of decades or sooner, mussels can take 40, 50 years. So there's still issues going on, siltation and the high flows and all the things we still see when those rivers get kind of muddy after a rain event. Mussels, because of the way they do their mussel things, that all gunks up their gills, and that's not good if you're a mussel. So well, for the 82 dam, it's a canal diversion dam, we have to do a mussel survey. That's part of what we do for looking at, are we going to impact those species? Because it's shallow enough that we're going to ask that question. My guess is, outside of the more tolerant native ones that you see and some invasive, Corbicula, that Asiatic clam is a non-native. And we see zebra mussels every now and then. So I'm guessing the mussel community is not like the Grand River or the Darby, where you have all these really cool endangered ones. Well, we already know otters are in the Cuyahoga, they're in the Grand, so that's a sentinel species of our legacy. We have beaver coming back. Mink have been around here for a while. They're kind of cute to watch pop around.
Great. I guess still some more questions. Here's one over here.
Hey, I just wanted to follow up on the sediment comment that was made about upriver from the Lefevre Dam removal and the Sheraton Dam removal. I've lived on the river for over 20 years, and I've seen the muck that used to be at the bottom of the river. Waterworks, you couldn't get out of your boat. You would sink up to your waist. That's all been cleared. I think it's great. The river's clear, the bottom's, improving, but there are still some sediment traps. I was unfamiliar with the glacial pool, but between the Doodlebug Bridge and Route 8 is a massive loaf of sediment. And if you look at the river, you'll see in Waterworks Park children swimming every day. That's something that didn't happen, a decade ago. But you're not seeing people use that section by the riverfront park. And if you walk into the river, you'll find you'll sink up to your waist. And if you look at the geology around, you'll see there's rocks, a lot of bedrock, and that area does need to improve. And we haven't had many floods since the dams were removed, so that we're not getting much help from Mother Nature. But is there any way that we can encourage that sediment? Is there any plan to help that sediment move, before this big dam removal to kind of have everything fall in line?
So when we do these things, anything Mother Nature can do, she does for free, and we thank her for it. And so when we're looking at these processes, when you think about it, those dams, you're looking at 100 plus years of a legacy of trapping the river. It's only been 10, 15 years for the removal. We're a little patient, and so it's not going to happen immediately. Is everything going to always be restored to the way you think it was beforehand? Probably not, because a river is healing itself in a fashion that it's best when we let the river heal itself, because this geology and this flow stuff, when you fight the river on where water wants to go, you always lose. So usually you step back and see what the river does. Now, if a structure or a bridge or something's getting eroded, obviously there's a different reason we want to do that. But when we step back from these, we want to see what the river tells us, how it moves, how it processes sediment. It is going to move stuff through, and it will change pools, it will change riffles. A lot of that is on bedrock, and it will clear out eventually. So you got to be a little patient, because it just doesn't happen overnight. And that, because of the grade, it was a little flatter. It takes a little more energy, which are those big floods. And it'll happen.
Hi, over here. Hi, Bill.
Yeah, hi.
Question for you. I know removing the sediment is absolutely important, but is there an action plan in place to remove all the scrap that's going to be in there as well? We've done multiple river cleanups since the dams came out, and just thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of rubber and metal we've removed. So what's going to be done with that?
So if you think about it, the river didn't put that stuff there, did it? So, who knows what is at the bottom of this pool? When you do these contracts, part of the contract is we like to keep them open, what we would call a design build kind of contract, so that you have some real specific objectives. And then if something comes along, like in the falls, you found that little rubber group. Well, because we had design build, we were able to say, maybe you should go remove that. It might cost us a little restoration project down here, but the team feels this is really important. So going forward, that would be a wonderful way we would like to see the structure. Let's get through the sediment. First, let's get it approved. Then let's get through the sediment removal, and then with the structure, until you drop the water level, you don't know what's going to be there. But you'll have the contractors there, you'll have the ability, because they'll have access and all that stuff. That's when you do the big things, and you try and get it as best you can. So we try and build that into the contracts at that moment, but you don't know. But the river didn't put it there.
This kind of builds on that question a little bit. Has your funding project limits been defined? So how far upstream and downstream can you go? And secondarily, speaking to that a little bit, is how long can your funding last? And so does it have a sunset on the timing of that? Can it last 5 to 10 years to help fund some of these annual kind of cleanup activities and things that might pop up on a fairly large dam pool, big river, lots of things can happen.
So obviously, nothing has been set in stone because we're still in the application process. But what I see, the project is the dam structure to the head of the dam pool. So that, because that's obviously the pool, that's where things are. So that would be the area we're looking at. From a time standpoint of how many years do you have to do a project, I think part of the whole point of negotiating this project agreement is to set those boundaries, and that's when we'll have more engineering done, and we'll say, hey, these are what we think the timetables are, and then it all has to coincide with the availability of funding if we secure that, and then that kind of guides the project. And the cool thing about the US EPA and getting these projects, it is a huge burden to get into it. So it's kind of like getting into Harvard. There's a huge burden to get into it, but once you get there, everyone wants you to be successful. So once we get US EPA to be a partner, they're as engaged in seeing the success of the project as we are. So you truly build this really cool partnership. And over the years, the different things they've done across the Great Lakes, there's some really unique solutions to some really weird things that pop up that just get fixed because it's a flexible program dedicated to the end product, which is a success, not necessarily all the hoops along the way. So when I look at it, it's really complicated. So you just kind of hum through the parts you don't understand, and you smile because you know that at the end, everyone wants the same thing. And so there are complications, but it seems across the Great Lakes, they work. And it's a great program. You want to say something?
I got 2 questions.
Is a panelist allowed to ask questions?
Well, let's let this gentleman go first, and then we'll move to the panel.
You know, Bill, this is to you, just information type thing. What is the total length of the Cuyahoga River? How many dams are on the river? How many have been taken down? And what are the plans for the future?
So the river-ish is 100 miles long with a 1,813 square mile drainage. So as rivers go, it's dinky. It's not even a dinky tributary to the dinky tributary to the Amazon. So it's a very small river. As far as dams on the main stem, okay, so there's lots of dams, and all streams have little dams. You have a housing development that dams up a little stream. That's a dam. But when we're looking at the Cuyahoga main stem, there's that first one, which is Lake Rockwell. And as long as we drink water, we're going to need Lake Rockwell. You went downstream, you had the Kent Dam, you had Monroe Falls, you had 2 in Cuyahoga Falls, you have the Gorge. You go down a little further, you have the canal. Well, then there's a remnant of a dam in Peninsula. So if you go in that parking lot where it takes that real hard left turn, there's a dam remnant there. So is it necessarily a block to fish migration? When that river goes up a little bit, the dam's gone. But would it be nice to get it out? I think some of the canoeists would probably appreciate it. And it's a symbolic dam removal. It is a removal of a structure. And then you got the 82, and then you're off to the Great Lake Erie.
So really, with the removal of the Brecksville Dam, that Route 82 dam, and then the Gorge Dam, then really that's just
We have a free-flowing river from Lake Rockwell. And you know, there are now, I heard, 9 livery water-based canoe places, kayak places serving the Cuyahoga compared to 1 some years ago. So remember, we did this for water quality, but if you do a project well, it's all these ancillary benefits that happen, which is even better because it gets more people out seeing how cool the Cuyahoga is.
Let's have a question here from David.
So I guess the question I had is, because it really comes down to the sediment removal, and the way that I understand it is you're going to remove the sediment first, and then the structure comes down.
Yes.
will the sediment removal continue during the deconstruction of the dam? Because let's be realistic, you're not going to be able to get all the sediment out. And I'll give you an out.
Oh, good.
Is there a transport study that's been done to kind of take a look at some of the residual that may get transported down and what some acceptable levels would be or not?
We have not done a sediment transport study. That's what we would call a study. That would be done if we intended to not remove the sediment. So with us, the intention is to remove all that we can. Are we going to get all 830,000 plus cubic yards? Probably not. Will the river mind moving a little bit downstream? No. So, I mean, perfection is what you want. Chances are, and we've seen this on all the other ones, things change, but the goal is to remove and minimize all the impacts to the aquatic life. And then staging of it, I guess that'll be a contractor issue at that time, what they think they need to do.
You might need a few good floods to clean it out before you hold another kayaking race.
Well, we've run
We'll have a
them
couple
down.
more questions, and I think we would maybe wrap things up.
Oh, we've worn them down. Oh, you're double dipping.
I'm just trying to picture the engineering of this now, visualizing it, and I'm wondering, all the trucks, they say, what is it, about 15 rubber bowls full of sediment, and how many trucks will be running through, and, well, not so many trucks, that's not the question. Are they going to use public roads, or are they going to just use the High Bridge Trail and run it down like to Peck Road and not even go onto Cuyahoga Street, or is there
So-
going to be something reconfigured already in mind?
So for the sediment, there will be no trucks. There will be a dredge pipe running down alongside the Cuyahoga River, and it'll just be pumping it right down to the ultimate place of final disposal into those sediment tubes. So that, and you can watch, there's YouTube videos for those of you that surf, of them doing sediment stuff, and you see these things fill up, and all of a sudden the water starts squirting out of them, so it's kind of cool. Now, taking the structure out, that's a lot of concrete, so it will have potential value to a concrete recycler. So those are, at that point in time, you explore those options, but that was in the report about beneficially using or reusing that material, and that helps potentially minimize costs. There will be trucks involved, and that depends on where, if you have a crush plant there and it goes somewhere, but that will have trucks, which is obviously a lot less than physically removing all the sediment by truckload.
Another point, the dam had some significant reconstruction in the 1980s. There's a picture I didn't include in the slideshow from the 1940s that shows it was really baffled, and all of that was filled in with concrete. Eventually it will fall down on its own accord. Sooner or later, cracks will appear and the dam will come down. So it is beautiful as a structure in itself, but it's not a permanent structure, even on that scale. One more question. Let's
the last one.
Wrap things up here tonight.
Forgive me if this is a step back, but are the sediments somewhat entombed now and a little bit safer than bringing them up to the surface and covering them over with a few feet of soil?
So if you were to stir them up, so like the mechanical dredging, there is stirring of sediment that occurs, and that does create some of that. I think what you're thinking is there'd be a plume of sediment coming off the bucket as it pulls up. When you're doing the hydraulic dredging, the straw is at the bottom, and it's a continuous, non-broken pipe from that point to its disposal site. So that's the way you really minimize that exposure.
All right, well, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I think it was a really successful event, and thank you, the panelists. Thank you, Mayor Walters, for coming out. Thank you, EnviroScience, and everyone. Stay tuned to WKSU and for the next Explore Radio event. Thank you all for coming.